How's it going? Great. Call the meeting to order.
Welcome, everybody, to the April 8th Environmental Advisory Board meeting. I'm Heather Sandine, and I'll serve as your technical host for tonight's meeting. We'll just start by going over our meeting requirements and protocols. The city has engaged with community members to co-create a vision for productive, meaningful, and inclusive civic conversations. This vision supports physical and emotional safety for community members, staff, and board members, as well as democracy for people of all ages, identities, lived experiences, and political perspectives. For more information about this vision and the community engagement process, please visit the website seen on your screen, bouldercolorado.gov/services/productive-atmospheres, and the Boulder Revised Code Section 16B. The city will enforce the rules of decorum found in the Boulder Revised Code Section 16B, including participants are required to sign up to speak using the name they are commonly known by, and individuals must display their whole name before being allowed to speak online. Currently, only audio testimony is permitted online. No attendee shall disrupt, disturb, or otherwise impede the orderly conduct of any board meeting in a manner that obstructs the business of the meeting. This also includes failing to obey any lawful order of the presiding officer to leave the physical or virtual meeting room or to refrain from addressing the board. Obscenity, other epithets based on race, gender, or religion, and other speech or behavior that disrupts or otherwise impedes the meeting will not be tolerated. Because we do not have registration for open and public comment tonight, you can indicate you would like to participate by using the raise hand function. The raise hand button is in the participant box, which can be found in the menu by hovering over the top or the bottom of your screen and then clicking on the participant icon. When the box opens, you will see the raise hand button at the bottom. By clicking that button, you can indicate you would like to participate in open or public comment. And if you've joined us by phone, you can press *9 to raise your hand. We will come back to open comment in just a few moments. And I don't think that was sharing my screen. Oops. Apologies.
All right. First order of business is swearing in our new members. Heather, do you read that?
No, they just usually read it on the record.
Oh, okay, great. Monica, do you want to start?
Sure.
By reading both of us.
Yes.
I, Monica Crosby, do solemnly swear that I will support the Constitution of the United States of America and of the state of Colorado and the charter and ordinances of the city of Boulder, and faithfully perform the duties of the office of a member of the Environmental Advisory Board, which I am about to enter.
Sorry. Thank you.
Prick your finger.
Daniel, you're up next. You have the doc in front of you, I assume.
Yes. I, Daniel Howard, do solemnly swear that I will support the Constitution of the United States of America and the state of Colorado and the charter and ordinances of the city of Boulder, and faithfully perform the duties of the office of a member of the Environmental Advisory Board, which I am about to enter.
Thank you. Welcome aboard. Next is just the approval of the minutes from last month. So motion to approve. Wonderful.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Just a really quick comment on the minutes. I wanted to clarify something that was in the minutes that may have caused a little bit of confusion. You remember we had the presentation on the comp plan, and I made the remark at the end about if the board intends or wants to have any comment on the draft plan, that you would need to talk about that tonight. So I just want to make sure you were clear. We don't have that in the agenda tonight. If you wanted to talk about any comments on the draft, we certainly could put that under matters from the board and talk about that. But originally, what the minutes reflected is that if you have comments individually that you wanted to share, then you could do that. And then that date, I think, was signaled as like April 6th or something. You do have a little bit more time as board members, as individuals, if you do have things that you want to make sure are captured into the record of the comp plan update. But I just want to make sure you were clear in what I meant last time and then what the minutes were reflecting. That's all. Thanks.
Thank you. Great. Do we have any
We have no public attendees.
Okay, moving on to discussion items.
You know I'm gonna tee it up because I can't help myself. Good evening, board members. For the record, Jonathan Cohen with Climate Initiatives. Just really want to start with a huge welcome to Monica and to Daniel. Really excited to have you both on the board. It's gonna be great. And just want to make myself and my team available to you if you have questions, if you have things that would be helpful to get you up to speed on the activities of the board or anything, just please feel free to reach out and we can schedule the time to do so. But just really grateful to have you on board. So I know we've been heavy the last couple of months on informational items to the board, and we're going to continue with that trend a little bit tonight. But when we get to the future look ahead on some of the agendas that are coming up, we're going to get into some more complex topics, I think, in the upcoming months. But tonight there were two topics that we really wanted to bring forward to the board as an update. So we'll start with an update on our climate action plan launch and Earth Day event. And I just want to start by thanking the board again for staying really engaged in our plan update. We've had a number of touch points with the board along the way. Your input has, I think, really helped us shape where we've landed with respect to the draft plan right now. We're excited to be getting close to the finish line, gearing up for the launch, alongside with some of our Earth Day events. Feels like an important moment to not only share out where we are on the plan, but to bring the community into the work that we have planned for the upcoming couple of months. So I am super duper excited. Let the record reflect, super duper is more than just excited. That is really excited to have our amazing thought leaders here to share that update. So tonight they're going to walk through where things are landing, what you can expect as we move into the launch. So Darren Wagner and Kate Galbo, I'm really honored to work alongside them in our department. I can turn it over to them and then would love to just hear any comments, feedback, or anything that you have. Kate, are we going to you first?
Yeah, and I'm going to share.
You were touching your screen, so I just assumed that was the case.
Hi, everyone. Kate Galbo. I'm a senior analyst in climate initiatives. And I joined an EAB meeting back in winter of 2024 to share about the CAP update process, our approach for updating the plan. And we got some great feedback from the board on that process. So I'm excited to come back and talk about the launch of the plan, what we're thinking that'll look like, when we plan to launch it, and the Earth Day event where we'll celebrate that launch. I did want to provide a bit of an update on the process and how we've got here, especially since we came to the board winter in 2024. So since then, last year, we focused on refining our goals and our strategies and targets. And we did a equity analysis in the summer using the city's racial equity tools. We also did some targeted engagement with leaders of frontline communities to refine the strategies in the plan and also focus on how we center equity in the plan. And then starting in winter, after that point, we did go back to City Council in November to share what we heard from the community and share the updated plan. And since then, we've been finalizing the plan. We've been working with a contractor to design the plan, as well as some communication materials, and we will launch that this month in April. And that's really just the beginning. That'll mark the start of implementation, and we plan to continue to engage with the community as we implement the plan and roll out its strategies. And we will continue to report our progress over time on an annual basis. So looking at the strategy for launching the plan, we are doing a kind of phased communications and engagement rollout to build momentum towards the launch of the plan, with the intention to really make the CAP feel accessible, engaging, and action-oriented. So part of that phased approach has been doing some youth engagement. We created a children's story called The Little City That Could. We have an animated video of that, and we'll have some printed copies of the book as well, which is really fun. And our team did do some light engagement with the Eco Rangers at Tantra's BHP community to get feedback on that, specifically the different climate action heroes that are featured in the story. We're also working on a climate action bingo card, which Darren will talk more about. And that'll roll out with the CAP as just an opportunity for kids to get involved and be familiar with kind of the action areas in the plan and different actions that they can take. There's also a focus on awareness and storytelling throughout this launch strategy. So as part of the kind of teaser communications campaign that we'll be rolling out soon in advance of the launch, there's a focus on awareness of what is in the CAP, the goals, the action areas, and the big moves. And some of the different community voices and stories that we have featured throughout the plan as well. And that'll occur through a variety of blog posts, social media posts. We'll do a press release, of course, when the plan is launched. And our team has also been doing some one-on-one engagement with community leaders to inform them about the launch of the plan, the Earth Day event, and opportunities for them to participate in the storytelling exercise at the event, which Darren will talk more about. And that leads us up to the Earth Day launch, the event on April 26th. Where we'll celebrate the launch of the plan. We'll have some interactive posters that show what's in the plan, as well as opportunities for the community to continue to engage with implementation. And that's all kind of leading up to what we're hoping for, which is a sustained collective community action through clear ways to stay involved and for community to take action and continued storytelling and progress tracking. I'll hand it over to Darren to talk a little more about the event.
Yeah, thanks. Fantastic. Thanks, Kate. Darren Wagner, she, her. I am somewhat new in my role. I started the end of last summer as the climate engagement strategist, which means that I am a part of the citywide engagement team, but I'm embedded in the climate initiatives department to support youth engagement, partnerships, community building, around all of the work that we're doing. So I'm really thrilled to finally get to meet you all and get to know your own work, and would love to just spend more time getting to know you all. What Kate was leading up to is our event that's coming up on Sunday, April 26th, as an opportunity to launch the Climate Action Plan. And also just sort of socialize the idea that it is a reflection of all of our community voices. The department has been doing engagement work for a long, long time and knows the community well in terms of the values that really drive our work, and that hopefully feels reflected in the CAP and in the work that we're going to do together moving forward. So it's going to be this open community storytelling event where we want to really bring to light and give space for the very many voices that have ideas about the type of climate future that we're really aiming for, and ways to express it better than we can as government staff. So the Climate Action Plan is sort of in its own way a story about how we're going to work together to achieve a certain set of goals and objectives. And we're inviting others to, they don't have to be professional storytellers. It's just people who might have a story that they might tell in terms of what we're trying to move towards. I think especially given the climate that this is getting rolled out in, or the environment, play on words, that it feels in some ways, or it can feel like the future's already being written for us, that there's, I think, some amount of grief and hopelessness that I think some of us feel as individuals or as community members, and we're trying to acknowledge that, and at the same time give space for the type of stories that retell the future, that describe the vision of what we're actually aiming for. So it'll be at E-Town Hall. We've held events there in the past. There is going to be a great venue for that. And we have about 10 storytellers lined up already. And it's such a beautiful mix of, there's even a middle school student who's going to present her vision of the future. There's a mom and 2 kids who wants to talk about day ahead renewables and how to predict your energy use based on that, as well as a community member who's going to speak in Spanish. So we will have 2-way interpretation, and a gentleman from Nepal. I mean, it's a very, very diverse mix of voices. and would love to add to that. So you might have heard me saying earlier, we have a max of 20 storytellers we can accommodate, which would mean that really only gives folks about a few minutes to speak, 3 to 5 minutes. So it's really hopefully like a light touch, a light ask. You don't have to have it doesn't have to be perfect or practiced. If there's an author or journalist who's written or quotes that you resonate with, those can also be read and shared. Really low stakes, no pressure. We are also offering for in-person storytellers people $50 gift cards for whom that would help. And are also welcoming video and audio recordings. That's something that was done earlier in the process. And so we're trying to circle back to that and bring several different opportunities to share your visions into it. So would love your help spreading the word, especially if you know storytellers who might want to participate. Like I said, we're looking for a few more, but also just to participate and come and listen in the audience. It's going to hopefully be a really special event. We will have, as Kate said, a number of posters that really lay out the content and forward opportunities for the CAP. So lots of different ways to kind of be a part of that story. So one of the posters will be a version of this. We made a promise to the community when we first started scoping the update to the CAP that while the process of updating it wasn't necessarily going to be a huge community process, that the implementation of it would be. So council at the time agreed that, in some ways we just needed to repackage our materials that were sort of living in different places into one coherent plan. But in that process, we really want to make good on that promise that we want to continue engaging community in the actual implementation efforts. So what you're seeing up here is a sampling of what's ahead in 26, and it's a lot. There are actually a lot of opportunities to plug in. We're scoping possibilities to bring community connectors on board, which tend to represent marginalized community members, and help advise on a number of different efforts. We're doing a fair amount of youth engagement and plan to involve kids in updates to our policy around plastics and single-use materials. We are working with a local organization to offer community-led preparedness trainings and have sort of broad-scale resilience conversations at the same time. And that will largely be focused in our manufactured home communities that are at the greatest risk of wildfire, wind events, et cetera. And a number of others. Power reliability is one to point out, especially as the new members are coming on board. You may know that City Council has asked the department to focus on power reliability this year. And so that will itself be a whole set of engagement opportunities as we move into the summer and into the fall. So what we'll do is turn these opportunities into an interactive poster where folks can really sort of relate to it a little better and see themselves in it and indicate the things they're most excited about and sign up to stay tuned for the opportunities as we're ready to release details. Next slide. And then another piece just to highlight, like Kate said, we've been working on developing a climate action bingo card and are really excited because it really captures really the entirety of the CAP, but in very simple kid-friendly language that helps socialize the idea that we all have a part to play. And that can also be fun. It doesn't have to be this like onerous, heavy task. So for example, we've worked with our colleagues in the Office of Disaster Management. And if you look at the bottom right example, read a book by Lantern or Flashlight. That was their suggestion about sort of prepping kids for the idea that we might have extended power outages. And guess what? We can still read. We can still play flashlight tag. We can still get outside. And while you're doing that, that's also building your preparedness and your sense of resilience. So we're really trying to think about it in a holistic way. We're going to offer prizes and ask that those get turned in virtually. We'll make it really easy for folks by July 4th. and are excited. This also ties in, if you aren't to come to the event, we're gonna preview the little video that Kate mentioned, the little city that could. And the characters of the heroes in that story are also reflected in the bingo card, so it'll also be a way for kids to follow up on that. So that's what we wanted to share with you. Again, really curious if you have questions or thoughts about where we are in the process or what the launch will look like or your role in that. Anything.
Were you guys talking about the cap on stage at E-Town, or is it more just the posters?
We're gonna have an introduction where Jonathan kind of gives the audience this awareness of. Yeah, that's right. I've already written your script in case you got it. And as you come in the lobby and move throughout the space, there will be posters for it to sort of be right there for you. Yes.
One thing I would mention, and I think this is probably helpful for Monica and Daniel too, because you weren't obviously part of the conversations where we were starting to display how we were thinking differently about this cap. It's much more accessible than previous versions, so it's user-friendly and it's really designed to understand the impact of the work, not just a list of here are strategies and here are outcomes and outputs in a very planner way. This is something that really tells the story. It allows people to understand how the work of climate is beneficial to a lot of our community members. And so I'm really proud of the work that the team has done in updating this. And I wanted to make a couple of references to some things that I feel probably important, since we're not spending tonight going through that draft. You'll see that, and you'll see the final version here relatively soon. And one of the questions I think you raised at our last conversation about the comp plan was just the relationship between the comp plan and the cap. And I feel like we kind of bushwhacked through that question a little bit, and I thought it would be a good opportunity to revisit that just a bit. Part of the challenge that we always have with departmental plans is where do they fit best, and when do you layer, and what goes up here and what goes underneath. And the best way I can describe it is obviously it's more in a time horizon. So the comp plan really sets out that vision, doesn't really list all of the strategies that we would take to get to that vision. It's a 20-year plan. The cap is more in the 5 to 10-year realm. And if you recall, it's really oriented around what are the big moves that we need to make. And where things get a little bit interesting is that a good number of those strategies live within our department, which is natural. But one of the great things, if you remember, is that we did this really cool interdepartmental mapping exercise that Kate led, where we started to say, well, what are the critical areas that connect to climate? Water being one I know that you're interested in. So how does water connect into the climate action plan? Rather than saying, let's take a whole bunch of things that the city's doing in water and embed them in the cap, it was, here's where they live. They actually live in multiple areas. So we have the drought plan, we have a water supply plan, we have the stormwater plan, we have the greenways plan. So it lives there. And as those plans get updated, they reference and kind of crosswalk back to the cap in terms of what are our priorities? What is the climate action plan intending to do? How does it relate then to the Boulder Valley Comp Plan? And so from our perspective in the department, then we have the climate action plan, which connects across. It's inward facing to the organization, outward facing to the community. We have our own departmental strategic plan. It really focuses on what are we doing? What are our theories of change within the department to make sure that we're connecting to those outcomes? And then we have our work plans obviously embedded in there too. So when you see the draft, you're going to see a lot of kind of high level framing, and then you're going to see the big moves that are the critical things that we need to be doing as a city. Does not mean that we as a department are responsible for those things, but we know that this is what we must do. And so I don't know if that's a little bit more helpful. I just felt like we kind of said, oh, there's a connection and a little bit of that layering, the SARE framework. And yeah, I wanted to make sure that we were a little bit more clear about that. Okay. And just to that point about water and that interdepartmental kind of mapping, what I think is really valuable about that is it's not just water, it's transportation, it's all of the things that are embedded and live within plans across the city organization. And I just continue to take an opportunity to emphasize that we do approach this as a whole of government approach around climate. That means that every department is doing their work to support our overall climate framing and some of those objectives and goals and vision. So it was really a fantastic exercise that Kate led to discover more of what the organization actually is doing that perhaps we weren't aware of before. So it created an opportunity for some shared ownership too.
So if I understand you correctly, the climate action plan essentially identifies where certain initiatives are already occurring within other kind of parallel lanes in different plans and understands the connections of whether, so it's not like the climate action plan is the only area where certain environmental goals and objectives are being identified and worked towards. It's like, okay, it's understanding where they're all kind of connected. And so if someone else is working on something, then you just reference them rather than saying we're trying to duplicate that. And then, but we're monitoring it, and that's how it fits into kind of the overall climate action plan goals.
You said that so much better than I did. Yeah, no, that's absolutely correct. That's totally right. And that architecture is really cool because what it does, it gives us an opportunity to connect in with the staff teams and the departments when there is an update, for example, in the urban forestry plan. Well, they're not going to go off and do parks. It's not going to go do that in isolation. We're going to connect that in, and we're going to have a staff team assembled around that from multiple departments to say, what are we updating? How do we make sure that we have the right touch points as we do that update? So that creates, I think, a much stronger mechanism than just having the CAP kind of live on its own in isolation. And it's one of the learnings that I think we've had. And in my opinion, and Kate can speak to this more accurately than me, but we looked at how cities were doing these updates and what was really important for us. And to me, that was the biggest thing that was updated. And we're now seeing a lot of other cities kind of move into that type of space, which is, that made a lot of sense to do it that way. They haven't seen the draft, but we've talked a lot to some other cities that are kind of going through this process now.
One question I have is, with this update, what are some of the major changes that have occurred from the previous version that you think really kind of are very different? Or
Yeah.
Take it first.
Yeah, well, in addition to what Jonathan has already spoken to about connecting to other plans, one thing that we shared, we last came to EAB as well, is the introduction of 2 new resilience and equity goals, which are now at the same level as our climate mitigation goal that sets our greenhouse gas emission reduction targets. And so just really kind of elevating those as priorities, not that they were not in previous plans, but just a really more of a focus on resilience and equity. There's also some new climate resilience data in there as well, some local projections that we've worked with researchers across the region over the past couple of years, as well as some mapping work as well. So again, just really the elevation of the climate resilience and climate equity as core areas of focus.
I would add one really important one is a much more focused attention on land use.
okay,
And so that was one area that we, I think, lightly touched in previous versions. And in this update, we're very clear about the importance of land use and the relationship to density. And so those are areas that I know are, I mean, we always joke that it's a full contact sport here in Boulder when you talk about land use and planning. But in this case, it was really important that we just square up to that one and say, this is what the best science is telling us and how we need to think about density and land use.
Another question I have is, what are some of the external organizations that you have partnered in the past or that you feel like you need to partner into the future to make this climate action plan successful? I'm assuming like for the circular economy, it would be like EcoCycle, and the Resource Hub and the hazardous waste management facility and others, but just want to get a sense of what other groups you're working with within your ecosystem to make this happen.
Might jump in, but please fill in. I mean, I think with the additional focus on equity, we've also had deep conversations about the difference between climate equity and climate justice, and recognizing that there is, over the history of government as an institution, there have been historical harms to these communities who we are now asking them to make emissions reductions, which just seems so sort of backwards in a way. So we're really trying to, in the places that we can, support leadership from within frontline communities to be doing the great work in many ways that they're already doing. They might just need a little bit of support, whether it's financial or structural, so that we can help elevate the wisdom from within these communities. And so some of those are established nonprofits, and others are, we would loosely say, community-based organizations that don't really know what their structure looks like, but it's these leaders that are emerging and taking actions that we want to recognize. So I would say that that's like a place that we're continuing to lean into as we implement the plan.
So do you feel like you've identified what those groups are? And were they part of the update? Or have they been primarily, now you've identified them and now you're kind of working with them to make them aware and help get their support and implementation?
I would say both. So Kate mentioned towards the end of last year, we had some focused conversations with a number of them in different formats so that we could really understand what their needs are. The other sort of parallel process has been the county's Climate Equity Fund, which last year was a competitive process to allocate a little over $2 million. And so in that process, we were able to sort of watch and learn which organizations got funded, which did not, which are somewhat new to us. You know, I think there have been the standard groups that like a group called Flows, which emerged out of CU as a center, but they have since become their own nonprofit and focus on emerging leaders within the sustainability field. So they're like, we knew about a number of partners like that, but also the county's process brought some new ones to light for us. So it's an evolving landscape. Some of these organizations, when they don't get funded, they have the question of like, can we continue to exist? So, you know, it's constantly changing, so it's not static.
Gotcha. One final question. With a lot of the metrics that you used to kind of determine progress or, you know, how far you are to making your goals, I'm sure in some cases like your projected versus your actual, there's, you know, still a significant gap. You know, for example, I think there was goals set for either 2025 or 2030 where the diversion rate from landfills was supposed to be like 85% or something like that. And I think we're now at like 30 or something like that. So, you know, is there a mechanism or kind of feedback loop or something where you can do like an ex post analysis and like, okay, what happened? Why did this not occur? What's going on? And then identify those kind of roadblocks and say, you know, this is within our control, and then this is like outside of our control, and kind of like, you know, connect those points. That would be really interesting.
Yeah, and we do review those metrics regularly, in a lot of cases annual, like with waste diversion, and I think we're a little bit higher, maybe like 45%, but
Okay.
it fluctuates year to year and really just kind of depends on like different projects happening in the community. Like some years there's higher diversion if there's like for the Alpine Balsam project, for instance, there was a high diversion rate for that. So that really made the rate go up. But we review those annually or sometimes more frequently if the data is available. And we'll review that with the project teams and just look at the data over time and trends in comparison to our targets. And if we're not tracking or, you know, on target, we'll review that data and ask those questions like you mentioned. So it's definitely an iterative process, and you know, we hope to meet our targets, but sometimes there's adjustments that need to be made based on factors that are outside of our control.
And is there any information that's shared publicly? Like, okay, these are the top 3 things that like, you know, that matter for us to be able to meet this metric, and like, you know, sharing some of the, you know, root cause analysis that you do, like, okay, this is why, you know, if we focus on these, you know, these pillars, this is really what moves the needle. Or is that just kind of discussed internally as you review your metrics?
We do have some public dashboards, but they're more focused on kind of like the outcome focused measures. I don't think it really touches on like the root cause analysis type of work that you mentioned, but when we select our indicators for tracking progress, we do aim to ensure that those are really focused on like the core impact that we're trying to make. And when we refine our programs as a department, we try to track back to those as well of like what are the highest impact strategies we can take to achieve that. So I think linking to that more explicitly in those dashboards is something that we can work on.
This feels like a topic I'd actually like to maybe flag for a further conversation with the board as we think about projecting some of our milestones and targets that we have. We have quite a few of them, and we often get into this conversation and seeing what other cities have done that are not on pace to meet some of those targets. And sometimes there's the question of, do you ever think about reconsider those targets to make them more realistic? I'm air quoting that because realistic assumes that we've chosen them because it's the most immediately achievable or the easiest pathway. Instead, that we choose them because it's what the science tells us we have to do. And so when we think about our emissions goals, it's like, that's not what we say, oh, that's just a really nice thing to hit 100%. And it's more, that's what the IPCC has said we need to do globally to avoid the worst impacts of climate change. So we're doing our fair share at the local level. And I think this is an important topic because we talk a lot about, well, if we get to 80% of the way there, do we consider that to be a failure? I would not. But it also, to the point that you're raising, I think is a really good one. What are the strongest headwinds that we're facing? And if we can't work around one of those, let's just say it's a new regulation or a policy, or I don't know, let's say our federal government does something absurd and claws back funding that we were relying on. Sorry. How do we think then about replacing those deemed savings or those deemed emission reduction that we had modeled out in terms of a pathway to get from here to there? And so it's always this idea of, well, you got all these levers that you can pull. Some of them are huge levers in terms of regulatory structure, policy, or legislation. And if you can't do that one, or is there some combination of a lot of smaller levers? And we're always in that kind of evaluation. And this is where Kate is so good in helping us kind of track where are we off track, and then what do we need to know? Can we double back and really understand how to stay on pace? But I will tell you, every community is kind of facing this immediate challenge that we thought we were in a really good pathway because we relied on intervention and support from the federal level and realizing that's not coming. And so doesn't mean that we're going to stop, doesn't mean that we're going to change our targets. It's going to mean that we're going to find a different pathway and get us closer to them as we possibly can.
The reason why I bring it up, just I've done projects in the past where we would develop like an economic development strategy for like a municipality or, you know, a region. And we'd say, okay, do this, you know, but then we would never follow up and see what actually occurred. And if it like was successful or not, and I was kind of bugging, like, why are we not following up? And we would learn a lot from that, and then that would help us with the next engagement. So I think there's value in understanding, okay, here's the target, here's where we are. If we didn't meet that, you know, why? And then this is what we can influence. And there's things that, you know, are outside our sphere of influence. And what other organizations could we involve, or is it just awareness? Is it just public participation? And, you know, the city can only do so much in that area. But I think, you know, I just like kind of targeting, like understanding, like what's the cause and effect relationship, why, you know, be able to meet that goal or not. Why not? What are the roadblocks, and what can we do about it? And what do we need help from others? And that could be like a call to action. I need your help. Like if we want to accomplish this, we can do this, and we expect you to do that. So there's, you know, some responsibility.
Are there any other questions?
I just want to make sure, Daniel, are you tracking okay? You hear us okay?
Yeah, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, cool. And if at any point none of us see you raise a hand, please, I hope you just feel free to jump in, take yourself off mute.
Well, great. Thank you. Look forward to seeing the new plan.
Yeah, very excited.
I will say I looked at like the user interface and it felt like a Mary Poppins bag with how
many things it's linked to, but it was so seamless. It was, yeah, it's really nicely done.
Love that. You see surprise because our governmental websites are usually.
I know, I was
they don't get that
surprised.
kind of-
This is beautiful.
That and the wrap, I'm gonna say the wrap is better.
Yeah, totally.
Wonderful. Moving on to the route.
Yeah, I'm equally super duper excited to have Olivia Childress here to join us to talk about the wrap. And I'll let her explain what that is and the great acronym that it represents. But, you know, in the last couple of meetings, we've lightly touched on the topic of wildfire, thinking about what we are doing to build our resilience, to de-risk our system. We'll talk a little bit later about some of the hardening work that we're doing with the infrastructure. But the wrap is really, I think, a culmination. Levy's going to do a much better job at this than I am. But as you know, a good chunk of our, actually not a good chunk, because the city has a lot of investment in wildfire work right now. But with the Climate Action Plan tax contributing $1.5 million, the intention of that was really to drive investments back into the community to help community members harden their home, manage some of the vegetation work that they need to do. And a lot of that depends on what's the information that we have, what should people do? What are they required to do? What are some of the best practices? And so I'm just so happy that Olivia's in the role that she is, helping kind of connect to our community members. And so thought it was a really great opportunity to share with you the details and kind of the workings behind the wrap. And yeah, is that anything else that I missed? You'll hit it, I'm
That's
sure.
a great introduction.
And usually when we shift topic, it's cookie break time. So pass the cookies.
Yeah. Oh, well, as Jonathan said, my name is Olivia. I manage the city's wildfire resilience assistance program. I'm actually based in the finance department here. And so I figured I'd just give you some information about the program, share some of the data that we've collected so far, and then finish out talking about some of the successes we've seen and some of the challenges and barriers that we're still seeing, and then take any questions. So we can dive right in. So if you are not familiar with the program, it's, as Jonathan mentioned, funded by the city's climate tax. So we have a budget of $450,000 for the year. And we originally opened the program in 2024, just for a short pilot from September to November. And then we did our first full fund round in 2025 last year. And then we're gearing up. I'm actually hoping next Monday, fingers crossed, we will launch it for 2026. So some of the details you see on this slide have fluctuated through the fund rounds, but this is all our most updated information for 2026. So essentially, we give a rebate to qualifying property owners to do certain wildfire mitigation actions on their property. So this year, the program is going to be open from April until October 1st or until funds are exhausted, which is an important note because we did actually run out of funding last year, which was a great thing because we had a lot of uptake, which was awesome. For eligibility, it's open to owners of homes, businesses, and other entities that are in the city's wildland urban interface, or the WUI. And so the map is up there. The colors are the different ignition resistant zones, but any of the colored areas are eligible for the program. And that map actually expanded, you might remember, in summer of 2025. So that added an additional 10,000 parcels that are eligible for the program now, which is awesome. And then the other prerequisite for the program is to get a detailed home assessment from the fire department. And if you're not familiar with that program, it is a really awesome resource. It's actually free to anybody in the city of Boulder, and you don't have to be in the WUI or anything. But it's through the city's community risk reduction team. And so essentially you sign up for a detailed home assessment. They send a specialist out to your property and then they walk the whole property with you. It takes about an hour and a half for them to do everything. And they take before photos of the property and they make recommendations on how you can make your property more wildfire resilient. They can answer any questions that you have. They can help you kind of prioritize because they'll identify a lot of things and it can be kind of overwhelming, but they'll help you pick, what are the highest risks at your specific property. And then they compile all of that into a really detailed report. And so they kind of provide that initial education piece for folks, get them thinking about wildfire, and then our program provides an incentive and a funding mechanism to actually take action on the things identified in the report. So this year, our rebate amount is $2,000. We did start at $1,000 and then we were like, this stuff's super expensive. Let's try to raise it. So we did $2,000 last year and we're staying at $2,000 this year. And then you can see the items funded down there at the bottom. These have fluctuated throughout the years and we have reduced the number of eligible items this year just because we had a whole big long list and folks were having a hard time prioritizing and picking the items that are kind of like the most bang for their buck, so to speak. And so we have kind of narrowed it down to items that we think are the most impactful and that commonly show up on people's properties. So that's creating a 5-foot non-combustible zone, screening your vents, replacing the first 8 feet of attached fencing, removing your junipers and closing spaces under your deck or like underneath your house so that embers don't get in, replacing combustible roofing material, replacing the bottom 6 inches of combustible siding, and then adding metal flashing. So that'd be like adding strips of metal between like where your deck meets your house or like where your house meets your roof, just places where embers can get lodged and potentially ignite your structure. So the application process is shown here. We do have a map if folks are not sure if they're eligible for the program. Our website does have a map where you can go type your address in and it'll tell you if you're eligible for the program or not. The next step is to get your detailed home assessment. This is really just a one-time thing. So you just have to, right now, you just have to get it once and then you qualify for the program every time it opens. The one caveat is if you got it before November of 2022, we do ask people to be reassessed just because we had a different software system back then. And so the reports are not updated anymore and you can't access our application. So our application is actually linked to this report. So when you get your report, you can go in and apply for pre-approval. And the application will actually populate with the items on your property that are eligible for the program. So folks just go in, they select the work they want to do, and then we review it. And the main step in the pre-approval process is we do require folks to sign a rebate agreement. So I send them an agreement to sign, they sign it, the city signs it, and then they're pre-approved. And that process usually takes about 2 weeks, depending on the volume of applications. So once they're pre-approved, they have 90 days to complete the eligible work and upload the documentation, which is really just some paid invoices showing what work they completed and the amount they spent, and then some after photos that we can compare to their report. And then after we approve that, we just send out a check in the mail for the rebate amount. So just to show you kind of how it's going so far, this is the aggregated 2024 and 2025 program data. So we've gotten 262 applications so far. Of that, we've awarded 206. And the main difference in those numbers is just sometimes people will get pre-approved and then for whatever reason, they just like won't complete their project. So most of those are actually people just like self-canceling as opposed to us actually like denying their application for some reason. We also started a wait list last year because we ran out of funding, but after 90 days, if people don't complete their application, then we sometimes have funding becoming available again. So that's kind of the difference there. But for the individual rebate program, we have given out $330,000 and the average award amount is about $1,800. So that's skewed a little bit by the fact that we did change the rebate amount between 2024 and 2025, but it's creeping up there to the full 2,000. And then total spend by applicants is kind of a cool metric that we're able to collect. And so essentially at the end of the application, people have the opportunity to share with us how much money they spent total on the project, like beyond what we've reimbursed them for. And so we have seen $714,000 of additional spending in our community. And we like to think of that as potentially like the number of spending that the program incentivized kind of above and beyond the amount of money that we've given out. And then the pie chart over there shows just the types of work people are completing. So you can see vegetation work has been very popular. That other category, just because we had so many items, is like a real mismatch of kind of random things on people's property. But siding is relatively popular, fencing, creating a 5-foot non-combustible zone, things like that. And then I should have prefaced this earlier, but we actually have two arms of the program. So we just chatted about the individual rebate program. Last year, we also piloted an HOA program. And that's because it seemed like there was this need in the community for HOA funding for more common space areas. And up until this program, and actually at the same time, Boulder County launched a similar program just for removing junipers. So that's cool. Now there's two different options, but up until these programs, there really weren't a lot of opportunities for HOAs to get money for these types of things. And, you know, they're often have pretty thin margins and don't have a ton of extra money to spend on wildfire mitigation. So we were kind of looking to fill that gap. So this was piloted last year. It opened in June and closed in September after we had obligated all of the funding. So it was open to registered HOAs in the WUI that had already gotten the DHA, kind of same requirements as the individual rebate. We funded, I couldn't put all the, the eligible projects on the slide, but it was pretty much anything that's permanent. The main things that we did not fund were like annual maintenance items that will just come back, like mowing or cleaning up leaf litter and things like that. And we offered them a rebate amount of up to $10,000. And so to show you the data here, we had 9 organizations apply and we awarded all 9 of them. We gave out almost $84,000 and the average award amount was that $9,323. So pretty close to the full $10,000. And then total spend by applicants, which is the same idea, the amount of money that they spent beyond our program was $54,000. So you can see on the pie chart, most people were completing vegetation work. That's the 80%, followed by siding, creating a 5-foot non-combustible zone, and then a couple wooden doors that were replaced. So we had a couple important lessons learned from this pilot. Number one, $10,000 really doesn't go very far. And that's why 80% of items resolved for vegetation work, because it's kind of just one of those things that the price is right. You can get vegetation work on a big common space for about $10,000, but you'll never be able to replace your siding for $10,000. So that was a major takeaway, is just like, you know, if we want people to do different types of work or, you know, other types of impactful projects in the home hardening realm, we're probably going to have to offer them more money to be able to do that. The other major takeaway was that folks needed help kind of scoping their projects, especially because it's usually HOA board members applying for this. They're usually just regular people that are not experts in this space. And they're having to, you know, navigate applying for the program, but also finding their own contractor and then trying to figure out how far $10,000 is going to go and what are the high priority items. And some of these HOAs manage pretty large spaces, or they have a lot of buildings if it's like a townhome or a condo association. And so that process was a little bit overwhelming. And we feel like we could have done a better job with like helping people scope their projects so that they're, you know, making the best use of the money. So that leads us to our program changes for 2026. So we are actually going to rebrand our HOA pilot a little bit to the multi-unit dwelling program. And that's because we want to include homeowners associations, but we also want to explicitly call out manufactured home parks, apartment complexes, and other types of multi-unit dwellings that might be similar to a homeowners association. And the main change this year is that we are going to rework the application process. So instead of just taking first come, first served applications at one set award amount, we're actually going to put out a request for applications and just a short narrative application available on our website, which will, I'm hoping, be next week. So these applications will be due in mid-May. I think I have May 17th right now as the deadline, as long as our launch happens next week. And that will allow us, if we can't fund everybody, to be able to better prioritize funding based on risk reduction, equity, and other factors. And it will allow us to kind of scale our award amounts better. So we're looking at a minimum of $15,000 and a maximum of $50,000. So we are hoping potentially to fund maybe a smaller number of organizations, but at higher dollar amounts so that they can really get more like community scale mitigation projects going. And then the eligible items are actually not functionally changing very much from last time, but we're calling out specifically, we want to align with the IBHS Wildfire Prepared Home Base Level designation. And that's the Institute for Business and Home Safety. And you can think of them as kind of like a nonprofit that's paid for by insurance companies. And so they're like at the cutting edge of wildfire science and coming up with, you know, different standards. And so we are going to align specifically with their base level designation for eligible items. And then I just wanted to share some success stories through the program. So I actually just put out a survey a couple weeks ago. And my goal with the survey was to kind of understand like who are we reaching with this program? Because we really don't know necessarily. I mean, people kind of just apply and we see what work they complete. But I was interested, like, are we reaching, you know, first-time wildfire mitigators? Are we reaching people that are actually very engaged and they're very concerned about wildfire? So just trying to gauge that. So we found that 50% of our survey respondents said that they were not planning on doing wildfire mitigation work and they would not have done it without the rebate. I think that's a great sign that we're reaching people that might otherwise not be doing this work. 65% of people said the rebate was either very important or extremely important in their decision to do wildfire mitigation work. And then the last two down there, 92% of survey respondents said they would participate in the program again, which is really awesome. We do allow people to reapply and we encourage them to reapply because we want to like remind people that wildfire mitigation is not a one-time thing. It's not, you can't just think about it one summer and move on. And even if you did all of the things on your report, there would still be things that are coming up every year that are more annual maintenance items that you have to think about. So we would love for people to reapply and do new projects every year and tell their neighbors about it. So I thought that was great. And then 97% of respondents said they were satisfied or very satisfied with the program. So that is always great to hear. And then lastly, one of our survey questions was what challenges or barriers did you encounter trying to complete your project? So you can see the word cloud, there's a lot of repeating words there. The challenges are pretty similar for everybody, I think. So I listed out the top 5 there. Cost obviously is a big one, and that's a lot of the reason that our program exists, not only to incentivize people to take action, but also because we know it's really expensive and this program can help take the edge off of that. Time is another one. That one's a little harder for us to influence, but we do give folks 90 days, which compared to other rebate programs is actually a pretty long time to complete the work. And I try to be really accommodating, like with extending deadlines as much as we can, just because like it's hard. You know, everybody has a life outside of wildfire mitigation. This is something extra they're doing. And so there's not a ton of, you know, that we can do about that, but we do try to accommodate folks. And then finding qualified contractors is a known issue that keeps coming up. And unfortunately, the city cannot recommend contractors for liability reasons. But if you know Boulder Watershed Collective, they're a local nonprofit that we're partnered with. And they're actually working on creating a draft contractor list that we can point folks to. So it's still in its like very beginning stages and they're not really able to like vet out contractors, but at least it's a list of people who we know are doing this type of work in the community. And so when people ask me for help, I can connect them with the Watershed Collective and they can at least have like a starting place of people to call. But we know that's a challenge, especially for home hardening options. It's like, sometimes it's hard to even tell like what type of contractor you would call to do some of these things. And then the last two are kind of self-explanatory, but understanding what work to do can be really overwhelming to get your DHA report for the first time. There's a ton of stuff on it. You don't know what to prioritize. So we always encourage folks to either call me or call the fire department. We are so happy to help direct people in the right direction for like what their high priority items might be. And then lastly, physical ability. You know, some of this stuff you could do yourself, but not everybody can do it themselves. And so That's just a barrier for like some of the other items. So yeah, that I ran through that super quick, and I appreciate your time, but I am happy to take any questions.
Just real quick on the last thing you said, I've heard, we mentioned this before around we can't list contractors for different things. There's not like a line we can say, this is not, we are not recommending this contract, like there's, because that would be so helpful. Because I did this report thing, which was great, the defensible, the
Yeah.
firefighter came out and stuff. And I didn't apply for the grant because I was like, where am I gonna find these people?
Yeah.
All the reasons you just listed.
Yeah.
So I don't know, it seems like a lawyer could figure some couple sentences out to. Anyway, would be very helpful.
One thing I will say, and I'd love to hear your response to this too, but one thing I will say is that we have some experience in that last slide about some of the challenges, because this isn't unlike some of the work that we've been doing for well over 20 years on energy efficiency.
Right.
So very similar, same kind of barriers, high upfront cost, the time, who do I go to? And one of the ways that we worked around that was not by necessarily putting out a list of here's who we think are the right contractors, but we did a pre-qualified contractors list. And so we ran contractors through a training to say, you're going to do the work as we want it done. And then you shorten the list to like 5 to 10 contractors who have already been vetted by the city and they've made it onto a list. That's one of the things that we might consider as this program gains some popularity. And if that's really continues to be one of the challenges, that's one way we could think about it.
Yeah, I think it would be helpful. The other thing on the challenges, and I don't know if this is even possible, like to list ranges of prices or something. Like I guess I did. It was like I have a wooden fence, and I was like, I can only imagine that's going to cost me $20,000 or more to. So like, but maybe I was wrong. I don't know.
Yeah,
just
you-
based on the
you-
data.
you were wrong for that
Yeah.
specific one. But I think one of the council priority items is creating, this wildfire resilience hub. And I know that there's been talk about like different things like that could be put on the hub that would be like helpful types of tools. And
Yeah.
certainly, since I look at all of the invoices for everything, there are really wide ranges of things, and some of like fencing, it depends. Like, do you want a corrugated metal fence that you ordered from across the country, or do you want a chain link fence? So some of it is kind of like stylistic, but totally.
Yeah.
And I think there's folks in the fire department that are kind of working on
Yeah.
some of those pieces.
The actual report they sent me though is great. Like in terms of ease to use, it's incredible. Pictures, checklists, like that's A+, I'd say. Not that I have to name my hardening yet. I will. I will. I will. Yeah, you guys make it really easy to like follow it. If the person takes the steps to find a contractor.
Yeah.
It's good feedback.
I have a question. Of the grant, of the, those who have submitted the request application for the grant, have you found out from them what is kind of a motivating factor for them? Is it like, they're concerned about like, if the home is like, the western side of the movie, is it because they're worried that their insurance companies are gonna raise their, home payment or their, their insurance rates for their home, or, what's kind of motivating them to do this?
I think there's a good mix. One of the questions we did ask on the survey is how concerned were you about wildfire prior to participating in the program? And
Yeah.
most people said extremely concerned or very concerned. So I think we are reaching a lot of people who are generally, they're just worried about wildfire. But I know the insurance piece is huge. I don't do much with that on the reimbursement side, but I know like our fire department is getting a lot of folks who are like, my insurance is going to drop me, or so they are trying to do that. And I think there's actually a third pathway too, where folks are just gonna update their home and they're gonna replace their fence either way because it's old, and they're just, it's the top of mind to kind of like, as I'm gonna spend this money anyways, how can I do it, in a wildfire ready sort of way. So I think there's like a combination of factors.
Danielle, I see your hands raised.
Yeah, I think I had some questions I was thinking of. I appreciate bringing in the insurance aspect to the piece. Does the program have any current partnership or future intended partnership towards identifying and help facilitating, say, I believe it's the term Firewise certification for that insurance companies have been starting to use towards making legitimate any meaningful wildfire mitigation that can serve to reduce insurance costs?
So I wish we had someone from the fire department to answer that. Because I think they probably the folks that do the detailed home assessments in the fire department would be probably the most plugged in with that sort of thing. We don't currently have any type of certification program, but I know they're like interfacing with insurance companies like quite a bit. Since I'm more on the reimbursement side, I'm not totally sure, but would be happy to check into it.
Yeah, that'd
There
be great. I
is.
think.
Oh,
Oh.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I was going to say, yeah, there is a direct correlation and connection, and one of the things that we're really focused on as a core team is really thinking about this connection to insurance premiums and what can we do to have the biggest impact in that space. Some of it is perceived, some of it is real, and so we do have a team that's starting to sort that out a little bit. And whether or not the Firewise program is the best way to do that, or if there is a signal that insurance companies need in terms of what we're doing to harden our system. So there are a couple of things that are mixed up in that, but we're trying to sort that out right now as a pretty large team. It's a really great question.
Yeah, I appreciate hearing some of those connections already exist. So happy that that's still ongoing. I have two other questions. I'll try to be brief with each of them. In the context of bringing up the working with contractors and identifying able organizations to help install some of these remediations, I'm curious if there are any building or construction regulations and permitting processes that create exceptional difficulty towards achieving some of those outcomes that contractors or homeowners, property owners have to navigate. I think in the context of in prior places I've lived, my family has a general contractor in our family, so to speak, and I've say installed my own fence by myself at like a prior house I've owned, but I did not need to get permits in my community where that was at the time. I don't know if the same would be required for like siding or other sort of things, but can those be barriers that are often, delaying some of these projects? And are there any means to facilitate those permitting processes when they come up through this program?
Good question. How much do you know about the permitting processes? I'm a little bit removed from that.
Yeah, I would say this. So the things that would cause sizable or substantial delays are those things that would trigger, for example, any building code or energy code. None of the things that are included on this program's list would trigger those types of things. Of course, someone would need to pull a permit to do a fence or something like that, or decking or any of those kinds of projects. But the planning department has most of those as over-the-counter permits. They're very, very quick. And so I wouldn't see, and I have not heard that any of these types of projects bump into or perceive a permit as a barrier. But I think that's subjective, right? If someone says, I need to go get a permit, like, well, I'm done because I hear permitting in Boulder is horrible and it takes weeks and weeks and weeks. So probably a good flag. And I'm happy to bring some detail back to the board in terms of what are exactly, maybe do a little crosswalk into what are the things that would trigger a permit, and then what are the typical wait times for those permits if there is a wait time. Like I said, most of them are over the counter.
Right, I appreciate that. I think as a current renter, I think my current building, and I think we happened to take advantage, I believe, of the HOA program to fire harden some of our surrounding buildings. But admittedly, still a lot of our decking is like old, decaying, and falling apart. And in that context, in recommending it to our building owner to make those changes, I believe they realized they would have to do a permit. So anecdotally, I think there was some concern there, but I don't have the full story in terms of their thought process in terms of why they still haven't yet fire harden some of the decking construction around our buildings that also don't have like enclosed spaces underneath them. And then thinking in the renter context for the last question I have, I appreciate the expansion of the program towards serving apartments and multi-unit structures. And I'm curious how there's maybe engagement towards encouraging renters to as be educated stewards themselves towards engaging their landlords to complete some of these projects, or if there's any ways in which to facilitate that relationship. I kind of think in the context of how Sundance is encouraging strong relationships between landlords and renters and future options the city is providing. And in that same vein of how renter members of our community are being served, is there perhaps a metric being gathered that can help measure equity impacts of the projects that ended being funded that might say compare the which parcels get funded and which say are single family home versus like multifamily homes versus perhaps even like the tax the amount of rebate offered on a per parcel tax valuation that's known to the city. That could be a metric to help determine, say, the social income strata of folks that perhaps might be receiving some of these benefits versus otherwise not.
Yeah, so our individual rebate program is first come, first served, and we don't always know. It does have to be the property owner who applies. So we don't have great data on that side of knowing like if that's actually a property that they live in or if they're renting it out to folks. But one of our focuses with the new multi-dwelling unit program is first of all to reach more renters. And that's actually going to be incorporated in the equity aspect of the scoring. Is we're going to ask folks to report if they know how many units are renter occupied versus owner occupied. And we do want to give a little bit of priority towards buildings that have a lot of renters just because they don't have the same opportunities to take part in some of these programs. And then we're also going to use the city's equity index map, which also factors things like income and everything. And it actually scores different areas from 1 to 5, from lower priority to higher priority. And so we are going to use that map, and then the number of renters will both factor into our scoring for the multi-unit dwelling program. And I don't know if you would have anything broader to say about, okay.
Yeah, I think that answered my question. I appreciate that. I enjoy hearing about the already integration of the equity metric map that exists as a data source that the city provides. That's all I have.
Yeah.
If you received a award in previous year,
Mhm.
can you still apply for another year or
Yes, as long as you're doing a different project.
a different project? And this program is just for City of Boulder residents. It's not if you're outside the municipal boundaries, but in Boulder County is Wildfire Partners handles if you're in the county but not in the city.
Yes, yeah, and that is a common confusion. It's just the difference between our program and the Wildfire Partners program. And they have the $500 rebate. And we do encourage folks to take advantage of both programs. I feel like sometimes people call and they're like, I promise I'm not double dipping. And I'm like, no, please, like do as much work as you can. Like it's available to you. So, but people do often get confused.
So it seems like there's value in understanding, okay, getting an assessment of like their risk exposure and then connecting with the contractors for getting an estimate, potentially linking in some understanding of how the insurance risk kind of factors in if they're at risk of losing their policy or something like that, and having kind of like a central portal or something like that to connect those different pieces to help homeowners figure out what they want to do.
Yeah.
Okay.
I know that somewhere along the way, we saw a map of like wildfire risk zones, and like this is a more riskier neighborhood because the wind path, whatever. Is there benefit in like focusing on whole community? I know you're focusing on the whole Louis, but like some sort of incentive of, okay, this is the high risk zone. If you get your neighbor to also do hardening, you know, you get an extra $500 or something. I'm just wondering, in terms of resilience, like, does that matter? Or is it?
I feel like what we've thrown a lot of like ideas around of like, oh, you know, we love to outreach to these specific areas, and
Yeah.
none of that has really like materialized in like functionally how, you know, we're giving out grants. Our program so far has remained first come, first served. And to be honest, it would be kind of difficult and, you know, just like logistically and administratively difficult to do it in different ways. But like we do know geographically like where, you know, people are applying from. And so like there's definitely, I think, more just like on the education and outreach side, there's opportunities for us to, you know, if we see like, hey, this high risk area doesn't have any applicants, and like
Right.
that's a great opportunity like for us in the fire department maybe to like you know, try to do like more outreach in those areas. But so far it hasn't really translated into like true program changes in terms of like who we're giving money to.
Even as simple as like an email if someone is in a high risk area. Tell your neighbors, like when I had the guy came, I asked him for some flyers and I brought them over to my neighbors. So like something
That's
makes it
great,
easy
yeah.
for neighbors to talk to neighbors. And just help instead of you guys having to own all of the, like, you guys should do this, you know, kind of put it on the people getting the reports to be like, help us make your community more resilient and engage them.
Yeah, definitely.
I do know, so council is going to be talking in July. It's a little ways out, but one of the things that they have talked about, obviously this is a pretty early program. As Olivia said, we're now in our third, technically second, really full
Yes.
year. So what have we learned so far? What does it mean in terms of where we need to do some targeted outreach? And as you know, I think council's had some conversations about what other tactics and strategies could we deploy. Is it, you know, there's this discussion about retroactive, thinking about what those that are in high risk or high hazard zones should be doing. All those things kind of keep resurfacing. And so the intention that council has is to revisit in July, talk about some of their priority projects, the hub being one. How are we tracking? What are some things that we could do with our policies to move faster to kind of meet the speed and scale of what needs to be done?
Mhm.
Understanding metrics, meaning what have we done in terms of our rebates and the hardening that community members have done, and then what's the result of that?
Right.
Have we de-risked the system? Yes or no? By how much? And so that's a big focus and a big push for that July session with council. And I know that there's an intention to bring that back to the board, and you'll see that before it goes to council. July 30th, I think is the date.
Yeah, I just, oh, one comment and then I'll go to you, Daniel. I do think with, and for the community engagement team, it could be really interesting. I guess that's very top of mind because I was in the evacuation zone last night.
Oh, I was wondering if that's why you woke up in the middle of the night.
Yes,
Yeah.
but my first thought in the morning was like, I'm gonna start texting my neighbors, like, this is a neighbor thing, and so
Mhm.
there's just something there, I think,
There-
to
there-
like capture
Yeah.
specifically for wildfires.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Danielle.
Yeah, I'll first offer a comment to the like neighbor motivation factor in terms of like the wildfire hardening that we did for our like HOA community. We actually attached, and I'm not sure exactly the program that the city was partnered with or the fire department. We offered a like educational event that we invited folks citywide to meet with our little community and the things we did to mitigate fire. So that's, you know, perhaps encouraging more of those kind of pop-up events, like maybe outside of like my area in west of Arapahoe of near Evan G. Fine Park, but also like other wooey areas across the edge of town. Can hopefully you can encourage the program can encourage additional HOAs or groups of community members to offer similar educational events. And on the July meeting, in terms of like, you know, I believe it sounded like the council was interested in just assessing the effectiveness of the program. Are there specific aspects or desired, you know, avenues of improvement that they would be considering, or we should be considering to maybe offer towards them in preparation for that meeting in the future? I'm thinking in the context, for example, of like I brought up the equity issue earlier, and like maybe there would be value of like implementing like a income cap limit in terms of who would be eligible for the rebates, given that they are first come first serve and they tend to run out by the end of each cycle. It sounds like so far, And perhaps people that are in higher incomes would likely already implement wildfire hardening regardless of the rebate they receive, whereas folks that might be lower income would be less likely to implement. The rebate would actually be more of a guarantee of that those hardenings taking place, and perhaps lead to a higher degree of people making these adaptations. That's one idea, but like any other kind of like areas of improvement, we might be like looking forward towards like metrics we would gather towards and being able to assess and come with more ideas to improve the program.
You might take a swing at that?
Yeah.
Okay.
This feels like a John question.
No, Daniel, it's a really interesting question. The way I would answer it is that there's not a specific plan to take this rebate program specifically to council. I think that it is part of a larger ecosystem of work that we want council to weigh in on. And I guess what I would think about is, given that this is a pretty new program, what I would suggest is when we bring that, and we have not calendared this yet, I'm looking at Heather to remind me, I'm telepathically saying, remind me, we can get this calendar. That before that July 30th session with council, that we would bring something to you and some representatives from the broader kind of team representing the wildfire resilience work. This is just one piece of it that you've heard about tonight, obviously. And so it would be probably helpful to put it in context of what are some of the ideas that you'd like to advance to council as they think about their deliberations in July. And then specific to this program, I guess I would think this year's program, I think, is pretty set. And what I'd like to maybe consider is how we capture some of your ideas, which are good ones, and continue to have that running list, because we did this earlier this year to say, okay, we're going into year 2. What changes do we want to make? And so I think that's the space that probably is going to work better as we go into 27. Is it the money that we have available, the specific rebate dollars, how it's allocated? And that's where I think your ideas are going to be really valuable. So I think it may or may not be part of that July session with council. I just don't know yet. We haven't framed that, but you're going to see that. You're going to have a conversation with the team before then.
Thanks. Yeah, I think I've just been thinking out loud already to like future ideas for that July session. Is like also the long-term planning that would be important towards city resilience planning around specifically spatial planning, as it's known. I believe there's looking it up, the C40 Knowledge Hub has like a specific section on that's more long-term oriented. I believe many of these measures are more kind of short-term actions we can take to mitigate wildfire risk, but there's also aspects of, you brought up like land use policies within like the climate action plan, and how do we discourage like low density urban sprawl and expansion into WUI areas, and creation of intermix versus and interface regions, such that infill development tends to be able to avoid the vast majority of mapped high wildfire risk zones. And so there's an aspect there as well in terms of like long-term planning around like land use that I want to, saying it out loud, want to just remind myself to hopefully have noted for that July session in the future.
So I got a detailed home assessment from the Boulder Fire Department, and I also had a conversation with Danielle McNutt. So I'm fascinated about this topic, and I thought I remember her mentioning that there are considerations that should be made for communities, because you can do all of your wildfire risk mitigation for your house, but then you're subject to also your neighbors. So if you can work in tandem, there's value in having that kind of like, group united effort in doing that. So I don't know, like, if there is something that could be an opportunity for a grant for something that could be done, community-wide, or if there's like an incentive, like, they do hand out like the little door hanger flyers of, to let your neighbors know. But I think there's value in that kind of like, community focus, initiation or effort to kind of, look at mitigation things in tandem with each other.
Yeah, and that actually some of this is like, it's just a little more difficult to kind of like control around the individual rebate program. But one of the elements of scoring for our updated multi-unit dwelling program is well, to Daniel's point earlier, like how much have you engaged your residents around this? Like, do they know you're going to do this? Have you talked to them? Have you had them sign up for their own DHAs? And then the other piece is that collaboration piece, like who are your neighboring landowners? And could you potentially, like, is there an HOA next to you and you guys could submit a joint application? Like that would receive a higher priority in terms of scoring, like through our scoring matrix, just because like you're getting, you know, the widest amount of community mitigation. So obviously we don't have a ton of control over if people want to partner up with each other, but certainly we would prioritize that for funding if they did.
Or what could be another angle maybe is what's coming to mind is if you could work with the contractors and they say, hey, you know, this entire neighborhood, if we all went in together, you could get a discount on, you know, something if you know, had like a larger, you know, pipeline of projects to work on.
Yeah.
That might be.
Danielle, we just actually, Ruben and I were just in a meeting with Danielle last week and she gave a presentation and brought up this very point. And it was a really fascinating map where over the past, I don't remember, was it 3 years? Probably 3 years of assessments looking at each year a map of Boulder, how many people have gone through the assessment. Again, what that doesn't tell you is what kind of upgrades they've done.
Right.
I think that's a piece that we want to look back on. But she did bring up this really important issue, which is you have 4 homes that get an A and 1 home that gets an F. And so what is the actual reduction in risk? And it's just something that we need to be thinking about, I think. It's an interesting one for sure.
Yeah.
Tricky.
Because like the zone 3 definitely is gonna go beyond your property, you know, boundaries, and so you're rolling this together.
Yep.
Yeah. And that's another reason I didn't do it. I was like, my neighbor has 4 juniper trees 4 feet from my house. Like, what's the point of changing my deck? But there's a point. I should do it.
But now we have the approved plant list and the landscape design standards that are now public. And actually, we'll send you a link to that. That was a huge body of work that I think you all saw at one point. So that's out on the web right now. So you can send that to me. Juniper trees are okay. Bushes.
Oh, really? The trees are different?
It's the low lying juniper bushes that are.
Here I am, spring, fall, information.
Yeah, jump the juniper.
But not the
It'll say how
trees.
high.
Yeah, it says.
Okay, thank you.
I'll add a quote from the implementation guide from the C40 Knowledge Hub on how to protect urban lives, health, and property from wildfire. And it states that though there are no fireproof plants, but low-growing, high-moisture plants with a low sap or resin content, hardwood trees, which are less flammable than pine, fir, and other conifers, and other fire-retardant and fire-resistant vegetation will help reduce wildfire risk. And that links to a reference as well for more detailed information if you ever feel like looking up the implementation guide from the C40 Knowledge Hub.
The guide that we just created, I'm just gonna gush a little bit. I think as far as we can tell, we are the first community to have done this kind of analysis. And it goes, this is what Daniel was describing, goes very deep in terms of what we have here in Boulder and what you actually should be doing. What does it mean to have that 5-foot uncombustible zone? What should you do in the next 30 feet? What are the right species that work well in our climate? And so it's a really, really fantastic body of work that I think many other communities are going to start referencing, just like Daniel referenced the C40 guide, because it's very localized. And so I'll make sure to send out that guide to all of you so you have it.
Great.
And the last thing I will say is we learned another new term. We often refer to what we're describing as a wildfire, but there's a term that's being introduced that we're trying to be trained to use, which is a WIC. It's a wildfire induced conflagration, meaning, I know it's like, let's put that all over the web because people understand that one. But the idea that when a fire is in the community, it's a conflagration, that the fuel source is homes and other materials. It's not the trees that you would typically see or grasslands and those woody materials. And so generally it's the idea that the fire that we would be experiencing is a WIC. you would have a wildfire like we saw this morning on the goat trail, and then it would enter the community and it would become an urban conflagration. And you treat those differently, and you fight those differently.
Right.
So we're learning lots.
We are. Appreciate it. All right, any last comments? Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you. Those are great. And then general others.
I'll try to make it quick. I've talked a lot tonight. I'm so sorry. The one thing that I wanted to raise, you heard reference to it a little bit earlier, is that we do have a session. Thank you both. We have a session scheduled on April 23rd with City Council, and this is the grid hardening infrastructure project that my department's been leading. You've heard a little bit about this in the last couple of meetings that we've had, but we're excited to have this conversation with council. It's a study session, so we're not asking them for any real direction. But this is one of their priorities, them meaning council. They identified this as a priority, mostly in response to a lot of the outages that we've seen, all the safety power shutoffs. And so the scope that we have for this project for this year is to really understand the causes and impacts of the outages. Why are we seeing them more frequently, and what's the configuration and kind of causal factors? We're going to review Xcel Energy's resilience investments and plans, mostly through their wildfire mitigation plan and some of the undergrounding funds that we are driving their investments here locally. We'll talk a lot about grid hardening strategies. So we hear our community talk a lot about things like undergrounding, sectionalization, microgrids, which really don't prevent the outages, but certainly blunt the impact in certain areas, particularly around critical facilities. We'll talk about some of our potential policies and partnership or advocacy options that we might have here locally and then at the state level. Then, of course, talk about some of the equity and critical facility concerns. So we're mapping it out right now. We'll have a memo prepared probably, well, we will have a memo by the end of this week. We're cranking hard on it right now. But part of this, I think I sent a link out to the board. That was our Power 101 community town hall that we did a couple of months ago after the December PSPS events. And that was really helpful because it helped the community understand really the evolution and configuration of our grid. People were asking questions of like, why did the power go out here and not over here? And so we were able to explain how our system is configured, how it's served through the different substations, why some areas that are underground had lost power because they actually have areas that are at high risk. And so we'll talk about that. We'll get that information out to council in advance. And then during the study session on the 23rd, we want to go through some of these details with them and lay out our plan. And with that, the plan will come back to you as a board, which is why I'm spending time on this. Our intention is to develop a roadmap, and it's basically a policy roadmap that we can be considering by year's end. So to look forward and say the next 5 to 10 to 15 years, what is the roadmap that we need to do to have a resilient energy system? What are the things that we can do as a city? What are the things that we need partnership with Xcel? And where would we need some regulatory intervention? So that's our plan for the 23rd. A couple of other things that I would just flag for you all that are going to be coming your way. Let me get down here to my list so I don't forget any. And just, I would say this is probably more for Monica and Daniel. I find it really helpful to go through in your packet. You get the council look ahead calendar, so you can see the things that are on their way to council. And if there are ever things there that you have questions about, or that you think might be good things that the board should be possibly weighing in on, please flag those for me. I can't guarantee that we can get a kind of a diversion from the pathway to come to the board, but I can do my best to make sure that happens. Some things coming your way in June. We'll be talking about the purchasing policy updates. This was something that you all expressed interest in, so we have that scheduled in June. We're going to be bringing some air quality matters to the board probably in July. We're still kind of tinkering with the dates on that. And when we get into August, we are going to be bringing some proposed updates to our energy impact offset fund, which is the fund that our marijuana cultivators pay into, and then those funds are used for income qualified nonprofit solar projects, for example. There was also a question or an offer, I think I just offered it, to bring to you a little bit of an outline of the sustainability features and plan and the operations plan for Sundance. And so we have that tentatively scheduled for, I think, September-ish. And then we also think have some building code changes that we're going to be bringing your way. And then the last thing I would say is you're looking at me at these.
Plastic.
Oh, yes, right. Single-use plastics. So we are taking some policy options to council in November, so we'll be bringing that to you in advance. Yeah, so we have a lot. We have a lot coming your way.
Policy for plastic in November?
Yes. Yeah, so this is something that we committed to doing a couple of years ago. So looking at where this was after, obviously, we were an early adopter of some of our reusable bag program. Obviously, we made in the first of the state. So we had committed at that time to bring back some policy options for council to consider in terms of single-use plastics.
Okay.
Yeah. Did I forget any?
The 2027 budget will also come to the board. That's the
Oh.
first, and that'll be in August or September. I can't remember.
I think that's September 2nd.
Right.
Yeah, so this was something new that council has asked that boards have an opportunity to weigh in on draft budgets. So we'll be I don't know what that will look like exactly. We're getting some guidance, but that'll be new for the board this year. September. So there you have a full series of agendas for this year.
Great.
I think Monica started to ask.
Oh, yeah.
No.
In addition to the draft budgets in August, you said there were updates to something that we can anticipate repeating. Energy offset fund.
Oh, yes. So we're going to be potentially making some changes to our energy impact offset fund. And that's where I was going so fast. I'm glad you stopped me. And I don't know exactly what that's going to look like just yet, but we do know we are going to be recommending some changes to that program. There's kind of a whole suite of regulatory and codes that we've been working on, and it's part of our, I always get this wrong. Healthy community, resilient buildings, healthy community, something.
Healthy buildings roadmap.
Yeah, but there's a community in there. We keep changing, or we changed the name so many times.
Yeah.
It's our 10-year roadmap for how we align all of our regulation with respect to our built environment to achieve the outcomes that we want. And some of that may be actually getting rid of some regulation or modifying it. And so that's what this roadmap has been about. The board has seen a couple of presentations on the roadmap from Carolyn. If you remember, it was Crystal Launder, Laurel Matry, and Carolyn that brought that, I think, twice last year. So that is one of the recommended changes, that and potentially smart regs, which is our rental housing efficiency requirements, and then the building code changes. Okay, I think I got them all. Said I was going to be brief.
Great. Okay.
Motion to.
Second.
That's it. Thank you.
Awesome. Daniel, thanks for jumping on from afar.
All good,
Appreciate you being
David. Everything's good in DC this week, so.
Safe travels.
Yeah, fun place to be.
See you next time.
Yep, maybe I'll send some pics of the cherry blossoms that are partially in bloom out here.
That is pretty nice. Awesome.
Can I ask you a really quick, unrelated question?
Yeah.